The Carnival of Horror, London 1750. While the aristocracy, draped in the finest silks, strolls through the manicured gardens of Kensington, there exists another form of amusement, a darker one. For a mere 2 pence, the price of a cheap ale, a world opens up to you that God has long since forgotten. They called it penny sightseeing, but make no mistake, this was no zoo. This was the Bedlam Royal Hospital. People arrived with picnic baskets and walking sticks, eager to witness the show. A spectacle where the performers were not actors, but souls chained in their own filth, the threat of insanity. Welcome to Bedlam, a name that became a global synonym for chaos, noise, and the total loss of reason. Yet behind those grand, imposing walls hid a system that had absolutely nothing to do with healing. It was a machinery of terror, meticulously designed to crush the human spirit while the world outside watched and laughed in mockery. Today we descend into the damp, suffocating cellars of early psychiatry. Be warned, what you are about to see cannot be forgotten. Once you enter these halls, the darkness stays with you. The history of healing was not written in ink. It was written in blood. In the shadows of the past lies the truth about what we call medicine today. Welcome to the Cabinet of the Forgotten. Welcome to Medica Obscura. Act 1, the gateway to darkness, from grace to dungeon, the corrupted sanctuary. Bedlam did not begin as a place of shadows. In its infancy, back in the year 1247, it was known as the Priory of the New Order of St. Mary of Bethlehem. It was a sanctuary of mercy, deeply rooted in the Christian faith and the sacred duty of compassion. Within these walls, monks tended to the poor, the homeless, and those whose minds had wandered into the darkness. It was a realm of prayer, of profound silence, and the desperate hope for divine intervention. But as the centuries ground on, the rot of greed began to consume the spirit of grace. By the 14th century, the hospital started to specialize exclusively in the insane, and the peaceful hymns of the monks were slowly drowned out by the first piercing screams of despair. When the state and the city of London finally seized control, the transformation was absolute. The patient was no longer a soul to be saved, but an administrative burden to be managed, and the sanctuary became a fortress of iron and stone. The facade of splendor. In the year 1676, Bedlam was uprooted and moved to Moorfields, into a structure so magnificent it was intended to cast even the Louvre in Paris into its shadow. The renowned architect Robert Hooke was commissioned to create a Baroque palace, a monument designed to scream London's wealth and scientific progress to the world. But this architectural splendor was a lethal deception. This massive stone titan was erected on unstable ground, built upon ancient rubble and the city's refuse just outside the walls. Almost immediately after the grand opening, the cracks began to show. The weight of the stone caused the earth to groan, and the bitter dampness of the nearby Thames seeped unchecked into the lower floors. The majestic exterior was nothing more than a mask for a decaying interior. It was a perfect reflection of the medicine of that age. On the surface, it wore the dignified robes of scholarship, but beneath the skin, there reigned a deep, icy ignorance toward the human soul. They had built a palace, only to bury a dungeon inside of it. Act 2, Architecture of Terror, the Reign of the Monroes. The Dynasty of Indifference. To understand the horror of Bedlam, one must know a single name, Monroe. For nearly 125 years, from 1728 to 1852, the medical leadership of the hospital remained in the hands of one family. It began with Dr. James Monroe, followed by his son John and later generations. The Monroes did not see Bedlam as a place of research, but as a profitable family enterprise. Dr. John Monroe became infamous for his belief that the mentally ill did not require healing, but only discipline. Under his rule, medical visits were rare. He believed the insane could feel neither hunger, cold, nor pain, a convenient medical lie that allowed him to leave patients rotting inside naked, unheated cells. While the Monroes accumulated wealth in their grand London townhouses, their hospitals sank into the literal mud of the Thames. The geometry of the cage. The architecture of Moorfields was designed to break the human spirit. The cells measured barely 4 square meters, without windows or any form of ventilation. In winter, the walls were coated in thick layers of ice, while the patient's excrement often remained in the straw for months at a time. Yet the true cruelty lay in the restraints. Massive iron rings were embedded everywhere into the walls. One particularly infamous victim of this architecture was James Norris, a former sailor. He spent more than 10 years of his life inside a specially constructed iron cage. A metal ring around his neck was attached to a bar fixed into the wall, making it impossible for him to move even a single inch. His joints fused together, his muscles withered into useless tissue. Norris became a living statue of agony, a monument to the management of the Monroe era. in which human beings were reduced to nothing more than numbers filed away in the dark archives of madness. Here are the next pages of your script in the detailed English version. I chose the language in a way that maximizes the brutality and medical insanity of the Monroe era for an international audience. Act 3, The Business of Gaping, the Carnival of Madness. The voyeurism of polite society. In the 18th century, Bedlam was not a clinic. It was one of London's most lucrative tourist attractions, rivaling the Tower of London or the Royal Gardens in popularity. Up to 96,000 souls surged through its gates every single year. But who were these people? They were a bizarre, unsettling cross-section of society. You would see wealthy aristocrats, ladies draped in fine silk and lace, pressing perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses to mask the overwhelming stench of excrement and rot. They came after church services or before a night at the opera. For them, madness was a moral lesson, a living proof of their own superiority and divine favor. But they were joined by the drunks from the nearby pubs of Moorfields, the working class seeking a cheap thrill. For a mere 2 pence, the infamous penny sightseeing, they purchased the right to stare into the darkest abysses of the human soul. Provocation as entertainment? These visitors were far from passive observers. They did not come merely to watch, they came to interact in the most sadistic ways imaginable. It was common practice to bring long wooden sticks, or even rent them at the entrance, to poke and prod the patients through the bars. They demanded a reaction for their money. They taunted the chained inmates until they foamed with rage, rattled their shackles, or began to mutilate themselves in desperation. The wardens, who, under the long reign of Dr. John Monroe, were often underpaid and inherently brutal, not only permitted this, they encouraged it. They sold cheap gin to the visitors, who then passed it to the inmates to fuel their delusions and trigger violent outbursts for the amusement of the jeering public. There are horrifying accounts of young men tearing the clothes off female patients, while the crowd roared with applause. The inmates were fair game. In this era, the insane were not seen as suffering humans, but as beasts who had lost their reason and, therefore, their capacity for shame or pain. Bedlam was a profitable carnival built upon the systematic slaughter of the last remnants of human dignity. Act 4. The Torture Mask of Healing. Medicine of Shock. The rotational chair, centrifuge of chaos. Once the gawkers had finally left the halls, a different kind of nightmare began for the inmates, the medical one. Under the aegis of Dr. James Monroe and later his son John, a brutal philosophy reigned supreme. They believed madness was the result of a disturbed blood flow within the brain. The solution? To redistribute that blood by force. For this, they employed the infamous rotational chair, also known as Cox's chair. The patient was strapped into a seat suspended from a complex system of gears. The wardens would then crank the mechanism until the chair reached a terrifying speed, up to 100 revolutions per minute. The sheer centrifugal force drove the blood into the capillaries of the skull, causing the patient to lose all sense of reality. It resulted in massive vomiting, loss of consciousness, and bleeding from the nose and ears. Monroe believed this violent physical shock would reboot the mind. In truth, it was nothing more than a medically supervised brain injury, leaving many patients as broken, empty husks of their former selves. The surprise bath and the purge. But the chair was not the only instrument of terror in the Monroe arsenal. Another favored therapy was the bath of surprise. A patient would be blindfolded and led across what appeared to be a normal floor, which would suddenly give way beneath them. They plummeted into a deep vat of ice-cold water. This sudden frigid shock was intended to cool the overheated nerves of the insane. Often, they were held underwater for minutes at a time, brought to the very brink of drowning, a horrific precursor to modern waterboarding. This was supplemented by a radical cleansing of the body. Twice a year, in spring and autumn, the Monroe administration ordered collective treatments, mass bloodlettings, and the forced administration of powerful emetics to induce vomiting. They sought to flush the black bile from the system. The patients were weakened to such an extent that they often lay motionless in the straw for days, physically unable to protest. To the doctors, this was a success, tranquility achieved through total physical exhaustion. It was a medicine of absolute subjugation, masquerading as the art of healing. Act 5. The Legacy of Shadows. Death as the only deliverance. The final station, the anatomy of madness. For many of the inmates, death within the walls of Bedlam was not the end of their torment, but rather the beginning of a new form of desecration. Those who perished in the damp, rotting cells of the Monroes often had no relatives left to claim them or provide a proper burial. As a result, the corpses of the insane became valuable commodities. Surgeons and anatomists from nearby London hospitals waited greedily for fresh material to unlock the secrets of the human brain. There was a prevailing belief that within the flesh of the mad, physical evidence of their possession or moral failure could be found. While the deceased vanished anonymously into mass graves at the St. Mary Bethlehem Cemetery, their heads often ended up on the dissecting tables of the elite. Their suffering was dissected, their pain catalogued, yet an answer to their agony was never found. In Bedlam, even in death, one remained merely a resource for a science that knew no mercy. The case of James Norris and the fall of the Monroes. But no injustice lasts forever. The end of this dark era was eventually sealed by the fate of a man we have already encountered, James Norris. When reformers like Edward Wakefield inspected the hospital in 1814 and discovered Norris encased in his iron cage, a cry of outrage rippled through the British Empire. Sketches of his mechanical dungeon were published in the press, stripping away the lies of the Monroe dynasty for all to see. The public could no longer look away. The parliamentary inquiry of 1815 exposed the staggering corruption, the systematic neglect, and the sheer cruelty of the institution. Dr. Thomas Monroe was finally forced to resign in disgrace. It was the beginning of the end for Bedlam at Moorfields. The walls of ignorance began to crumble, and men like William Tuke proved with their York retreat that human compassion could achieve far more than chains, cages, and rotational chairs. Return to the cabinet. The warning of history. Bedlam stands today as a museum, a place of knowledge and reflection. Yet the name still echoes through history as a chilling warning. It serves as a reminder of what happens when we stop seeing the human being behind the illness. When greed and arrogance are allowed to guide the scalpel and the soul, the shadows of Bedlam are a part of our shared heritage. We have broken the chains, but the scars left upon our history run deep. Our journey through the cabinet of the forgotten continues. If you are ready to unveil the dark truths of medical history, then follow us. Subscribe to Medica Obscura and peer with us into the abyss. Until the next chronicle, in the shadows.